What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. In today's episode, we're going to be starting a 3-part mini-series here on the channel about the best varieties for certain gardening skill levels. You see, we get asked all the time from beginning gardeners, Luke, I'd really like to grow something, but I'm a first-time gardener. What's the best thing for me to grow? Other people say, I've been gardening for a few years. I'm looking for a little bit more of a challenge, but I don't want to get too, into over my head. So is there anything for me? And then there are other people that say, I've been gardening my whole life. I want to see if there's something out there that's going to challenge me as a gardener. And so is there anything for me? So obviously not every variety could be included in this series, and that's because there's millions, if not billions of them out there. So if I don't mention something that you're interested in growing, the best thing you can do is kind of look at some of the characteristics of that plant and compare it to some of the characteristics of these plants that I'm going to mention. And that way, if there's similarities between the two, you can kind of best guess what the skill level might be for that plant that you're trying to grow. The other thing I was going to mention is that this series is not intended to deter you from growing something. If I mention a plant in a future episode that's going to require a higher skill level than you currently have, don't think that you can't grow it. If you're someone that doesn't mind risking planting something that might not come to fruition, if you're not worried about failure like I was when I was a beginning gardener, don't worry about it and try growing everything. But there are a lot of people, and the main reason why I'm filming this episode is because I would say about 50 to 70% of gardeners that come to me are afraid of growing something because they fear failure. And so if you're someone that fears failure, you're going to be far more apprehensive to grow something because you're not sure if you can grow it or not. And so this episode in this series is ultimately going to give you the confidence to know that yes, you can grow this. And failure is always a possibility, but at least I'm assuring you that with basic level information or intermediate level of information or advanced level of information, you should be able to grow these different crops at these different stages in your gardening career. The first thing I wanted to start with were some early season crops. Early season crops allow you as a gardener to extend your growing season. Anytime you can extend your growing season, you're going to be able to grow more things, and that means you're going to enjoy your garden longer. These crops here are great for the beginning gardener because they're very forgiving. Things like giant noble spinach, very cold hardy, very easy to grow. Seeds are super resilient. You can throw them out in the snow right now, and when the snow melts in the spring, they'll just germinate. They really don't even need to be planted in the soil. You can just scatter them and they'll sprout. That's how resilient and forgiving these are. So they're great for a beginning gardener. Giant red mustards. These are very quick to mature, very forgiving. They don't require a whole lot of soil nutrients, and you don't have to get a whole lot of things right in order to grow them. French breakfast radishes. These are very fast to mature. We're talking like 20 to 25 days you're going to be harvesting stuff. So for a beginning gardener, that's the kind of motivation and confidence boost that you need to get going. And 25 days, you're going to get that sense of satisfaction and that gratification really quickly. Radishes are a great one. Also, these, because they grow very long, they don't need to be spaced as carefully. So I've been able to kind of scatter the seeds without any regard to spacing, and they've done great. When you get more into knowing what spacing to have and knowing how to space things properly, that'll allow you to grow more things. But when it comes to root crops like this, it's such a forgiving one. The other thing that I have here is Lincoln peas. I love Lincoln peas because, number one, they're a pea. They fix nitrogen into the soil, so if your soil nutrients aren't there where they need to be yet, these are forgiving. They're also going to produce a lot. They're cold hardy, so if you happen to not get the timing right and you happen to get an early frost, these will still survive. And then finally, because they are what's known as a combination pea, it's kind of like it's a hybrid between a snap pea and a shelling pea. So a snap pea, you'd consume the pods, and a shelling pea, you'd consume the peas. But since this is a hybrid between the two, it's an heirloom, but it's kind of a cross between the two. You get the best of both worlds, I should say. If you happen to not know when something is ripe, which is something that I really struggled with as a beginning gardener, I'd look at it on the plant and I would say, I don't know if it's ripe yet. I don't want to ruin something by picking it too soon. And so sometimes it would go too late and it would get just overripe. With these, if they get too mature, you're going to harvest them for the peas inside. Or if you happen to harvest them early, you can eat them for their pods on the outside. Again, very great for a beginning gardener when you're trying to kind of get an eye for when things are ripe. The next thing are flowers. I absolutely love flowers because flowers, they help to attract beneficial insects, and these are also edible, meaning you can eat the flower. You can actually eat the flowers that they produce. The nice thing about these is that they're super forgiving. Borage and the marigolds, you can pretty much scatter the seeds on top of the soil surface. You don't have to worry much about spacing or anything like that. They're gonna grow and they're gonna produce. Things like carrots. Okay, carrots are one that not all carrots are good for beginning gardeners. The best one is Parisian carrot. And the reason why is because they don't have much of a taproot at all. These are very stubby, short carrots. And so you don't have to worry as much about spacing, but the biggest thing you don't have to worry as much about is soil. When it comes to beginning gardeners, soil is something that is rarely right. Okay, I can speak from experience that my soil in my garden was hard, it was compacted. I had not yet learned how to amend it, how to protect it, and how to keep the condition adequate for growing good root vegetables. So in the beginning, I would never get carrots that came out the way I wanted them to, but whenever I grew Parisian carrots, I always had success. These are also great in containers because they don't produce a long taproot. You can even grow them in containers, which I know a lot of beginning gardeners start in containers because they're just, they want to get their feet wet for the idea of growing a crop before they go big scale and put in a garden. So these are great for that as well. So awesome, awesome crop, very forgiving for beginning gardeners. The next set of crops are herbs. Herbs are some of your most rewarding crops to grow for a beginning gardener because you're going to see the most money saving from these crops. Things like basil, very forgiving. All basil varieties are good. Not just Italian large leaf, but most beginning gardeners go to Italian large leaf because it's the thing that most gardeners use in their cooking. Thyme. Thyme is a low growing ground cover. It grows extremely well. It's perennial, so it's going to come back year after year. You plant it once and you're going to get a return every single year. It's great. Cilantro, it's fast to mature. It handles cold weather and it's a very resilient and easy to grow plant. Parsley. This one right here is actually a biennial, so it's going to grow back year after year. It will flower the second year, but the leaves that you harvest as the herb for parsley, they grow back every single year. These are very easy to grow, and in fact, if you put these in a container or the garden, they're going to excel. So they're very versatile in that way as well. One that not most people think about as being easy for beginning gardeners is sage. It's kind of a mysterious herb, but this one is so easy to grow. In fact, I always recommend gardeners grow sage because of the fact that it handles low light conditions well, it handles poor soil conditions well, it can handle drought very well and heat very well, as well as cold, and it is a perennial, so it's going to come back year after year. You cannot go wrong with some sage. The next thing is almost impossible to kill is dill. It's impossible to kill dill. This is bouquet dill, and I absolutely love this because it's known as dillweed for a reason. It pretty much grows like a weed. Beginning gardeners can sow this densely. They don't have to worry about spacing. And if you plant this in your garden, the only thing you do have to worry about is it spreading. So if it forms a flower head, cut the flower heads back because it will take over. So again, speaking from experience, but this one right here is so easy to grow that it's pretty much a self-seeding perennial. It's a self-seeding annual, I should say, but it kind of grows like a perennial because all you have to do is let a few just a few seeds drop from flower heads, and you've got 10 or 20 plants the next year. So a very easy one to grow. The next one is another perennial, chives. Chives are another one that can totally take over your garden, but you almost have to try to kill these. These are a member of the allium family, so they're a lot like an onion, but they grow back year after year. They handle poor quality soil. They are just an absolute champ in even low light conditions. So these are very, very forgiving for beginning gardeners. The next set of varieties that I chose for beginning gardeners are leafy green crops. Things like Swiss chard, very cold hardy, very heat tolerant, very drought tolerant. You can grow it in spring, summer, and fall, so you don't have to worry about the timing it takes. When's the best time to plant it? You don't have to worry about that. It grows all season long, and it produces a ton. The next thing is lacinato kale. All kale varieties will do great. You can grow any variety of kale, and you're going to have success. As a beginning gardener, I cannot recommend growing this enough because it produces, much like the Swiss chard, spring, summer, and fall. Produces all season long, and you're going to get a ton out of it. Very, very forgiving. Cabbage. Now, I love cabbage because when it comes to cabbage, you don't have to do a whole lot. You have to plant it out in the springtime. It's going to mature by midsummer, and you're going to get a harvest. Sometimes the heads are not as big as we always want them to be, but I have never had a head of cabbage not form a head. So very, very easy to grow. For a beginning gardener, you cannot go wrong. The only thing you have to remember is spacing. But In order to get spacing right, the only thing you have to do is just look on the back of the packet. Every single packet of seeds should have, at least MIgardener seeds have it, they should have some plant spacing. As long as you keep the plant spacing in line, they're going to produce well for you. The next thing is collards. Collards are a lot like cabbage. They grow spring, summer, and fall. Or I guess they're a lot like cabbage and kale, kind of like a cross between the two. Collards are great because they grow all season long. They're heat tolerant, they're drought tolerant, they're a total champ. They take cold weather, they take a frost. They're just awesome, very forgiving. You cannot go wrong with some collards. And then finally, broccoli rabe or spring rapini. Now this is actually a broccoli, and the reason why I chose this and not another different variety of broccoli is because heading broccolis are actually in a more advanced level of gardening. That's because it really comes down to timing when it comes to growing broccoli right. In fact, I'll own it, I still have a hard time growing broccoli. And it's not because I don't know how to, it's because the weather in Michigan is so unpredictable that in order for me to get the timing exactly right, I would have to have a crystal ball. The next thing is an onion. Now this is the Tokyo long bunching onion. I could not recommend growing bunching onions more for a beginning gardener. The reason why is because onions can be very difficult. With bunching onions, you don't have to worry about plant spacing. You don't have to worry about how long it takes for them to mature. You don't have to worry about daylight periods if they're a long day, short day onion or an intermediate day onion. You don't have to worry about any of those things. Tokyo long bunching onions, they grow well in bunches, and because they don't form a bulb, you don't have to worry about any of those other things. You'll see onions in all three different skill levels because onions are pretty tricky. So these are by far the most forgiving. Now these are not like a true onion, but when it comes to like onion flavor, you're gonna get great onion flavor from these. And because you can grow a lot of them in a small space, they're pretty good to grow for a beginning gardener. The final thing I would say about these too is that these are very fast maturing. You're gonna get to harvest these in about 45 days. Compare that to a regular onion, it's like 90 to 100 days. So you're getting twice as fast of a harvest and it's like 10 times easier to grow. Next thing are bush beans. Any bush bean is gonna be great for you as a beginning gardener because they stay low to the ground. You don't have to worry about trellising them up. You don't have to worry about them kind of taking over the garden. They stay pretty contained and they produce a lot. Because they fix nitrogen, they also are kind of self-contained and self-sustaining. So you don't have to worry if your soil's not great. They're going to do very well for you. A couple bean plants are really all you need to feed a family. And that's one thing that I really love as a beginning gardener is, again, kind of seeing that return. You know, when you plant out 3 or 4 plants and you have enough to feed your whole family, it's a really good kind of boost of confidence to know that you are going to make this worth your while, and beans are going to do just that. Beans, the more you pick, the more you get. So great ones for beginning gardeners. The next one is lettuce. Now lettuce is kind of a standalone leafy green crop because it's in all the other skill levels. So not all lettuce is recommended for beginning gardeners. Beginning gardeners, I would recommend going with a leaf lettuce. And the reason why is because when you get into something, things like a heading lettuce or an iceberg lettuce, those get really challenging when it comes to timing and spacing. If you don't have both of those on lock and you know how to do it properly, leaf lettuce is very forgiving. You can literally sprinkle the seeds in the ground with complete disregard to spacing, and you're gonna get a harvest. The other thing with these is the fact that these are very resilient to heat. We can actually grow leaf lettuce about 2 or 3 months longer than any heading lettuce because, like I said, they're just more heat tolerant. So I love them for that. But then the final thing is the fact that, I think the biggest selling point is the fact that you don't have to worry about spacing or anything. You harvest them for the leaves because they're leaf lettuce. So a great one. Beets. Now I love beets because all beets are going to be great. When it comes to beets, they're very quick to mature. We're talking like 40 to 60 days, but also the leaves are edible as well. So if you don't happen to get the nice round bulb, which that can take a little bit of experience to get that to grow as well as you want, the leaves are still edible as well. So if the plant grows, you can still get a harvest, which is nice. Beets are awesome, very forgiving. They grow in both spring, summer, and fall. So you're gonna get a nice long growing season for these and lots of opportunities to grow beets. Tomatoes. Now I knew you were waiting for tomatoes. You're probably thinking to yourself, when's he gonna mention tomatoes? I really wanna grow tomatoes. Well, not all tomatoes are created equal. I would not recommend all varieties of tomatoes for beginning gardeners because there are quite a few different nuances to growing tomatoes that make them kind of tricky. What I would recommend is starting with what's called a determinant. As a beginning gardener, you're going to hear this term a lot, determinant and indeterminate. When you're growing a determinate tomato, it's going to have a set height and a set fruit yield. That is great for you because it adds the ability for you to be able to kind of predict what you're going to get, and it also reduces the infrastructure that you have to have. You know, with some of these indeterminate tomatoes, you've got to know how to stake them properly, you've got to know how to prune them properly, you've got to know how to take care of them to keep them disease-free. A lot of these determinate tomatoes, they're fast to mature. When it comes to a tomato, they're fast to mature, but they also are, they're very kind of bushy and contained, so they're easy to grow, and for a beginning gardener, you can't go wrong. The next thing is the straight 8 cucumber. All cucumbers are pretty forgiving for beginning gardeners because they produce a lot, and you know, they're pretty maintenance free. But the reason why I chose straight 8 is because as a beginning gardener, I had to remember back to some of the things that I encountered when growing cucumbers. And one of them kind of ties back into what I talked about with peas. I didn't always know when they were ripe. I didn't always know when the ideal time to pick them was. And so sometimes I picked cucumbers a little bit too mature, when they were a tiny bit seedy, and you know the taste. If you've ever had an overripe cucumber, it's not quite as desirable as one would think. It's very bitter, very green, and it can totally turn you off of ever eating a homegrown cucumber again, when in reality it's just because you grew it a little bit too long on the vine or it got a little too hot. When it comes to straight 8 cucumbers, their flavor is great even if they're slightly mature. So I love it for that. The other thing I love it for is that it's very resilient to disease and pests. When you're a beginning gardener, you haven't quite figured out how to fight diseases and pests yet, so I don't want to add anything else onto someone's plate that they don't know how to do yet or handle. So when it comes to straight 8 cucumbers, they're going to be very forgiving in that regard as well. And then finally, the last one, and personally one of my favorites for beginning gardeners, and one that nobody is ever going to talk about. This is green purslane. The reason why I love green purslane so much is because it's literally a weed. Now these grow as weeds, but they're also edible. So what they've done is they've simply cultivated seeds from a weed, and a lot of people have these growing in their yard, in the cracks of their driveways. And so if you do, you don't need to necessarily buy these plants, just pull them up and put them in your garden. But identifying them is super important to make sure that you're actually eating purslane and not something that could potentially be poisonous. When it comes to seeds, these are so easy because of the fact that these grow as weeds. So just take some seeds, sprinkle them throughout the garden, you're going to have purslane. These are also a perennial, so they're going to grow back year after year. And also, when it comes to just its forgiveness, when it comes to its growing, you know, kind of the conditions that it grows in, it grows as a weed. So it's going to handle drought, heat, cold, any type of stress you can throw at it, poor quality soil, it doesn't matter. It's a weed. It's kind of developed itself to growing in all different soil conditions, and it grows in the wild without anyone coming and fertilizing it or watering it or mending the soil, and it grows just fine. So this will grow great for you, and it's extremely, extremely easy. So those are the crops that are best for beginning gardeners. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. As always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. Make sure to stay tuned for tomorrow's episode, which is going to be on intermediate gardeners. And I know you guys are going to love it because all of our videos are kind of, they're meant to excite you, they're meant to engage you, and I really hope that we're doing just that. So, as always, I'll catch you all on tomorrow's episode. Grow big or go home. See ya. Bye.